She endured her mother's cruelty, until a silent mountain man changed her fate. Alara woke to the faint hum of the settlement's life support systems, their soft vibrations seeping through the thin walls of her small room. Outside, the twin suns of the terraformed mountain world were just beginning to rise over jagged, snow-capped peaks. Light spilled into her room in golden streams, dust motes dancing like tiny sparks in the morning. Yet, for all the beauty outside, Alara felt trapped inside. Her mother's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding. "Alara, breakfast, and make sure your workbench is spotless before you even think of touching those scraps again." Alara's shoulders slumped. The command wasn't new. It had followed her every morning since she could remember. Her mother, a woman of precise habits and unyielding standards, believed that curiosity without control was chaos. And Alara had always been curious, about machines, about the mountains, about how the air seemed to whisper secrets only a few could hear. But curiosity at home was treated as disobedience. "Yes, mother," she called softly, pushing herself out of the narrow bed. Her room was small, sparsely furnished, with a narrow bed, a single shelf stacked with tools, and her precious workbench tucked into the corner. It was her sanctuary, though it was constantly under her mother's watchful eyes. Alara moved through the cramped kitchen, the aroma of synthetic grain porridge filling her nose. Her mother, tall and imposing, stood at the stove, stirring mechanically. Her face was set in that familiar stern expression, one that left little room for warmth or tenderness. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to the table, "and eat. We have work to do today, and I expect no distractions from you." Alara obeyed. She lowered her head, trying not to meet her mother's gaze. Every glance seemed to pierce her like a cold wind, a reminder of the expectations she could never fully meet. Yet even as she ate, her mind wandered to the scraps on her workbench, small pieces of metal, wires, and gears she had found discarded in the colony's recycling center. To most people they were useless junk. To her they were seeds of invention. Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts again. "You will not spend your time with toys, Alara. Real work, meaningful work, is what matters. You are not here to indulge your fantasies. Do you understand?" "Yes, mother," Alara whispered. She hated that she had to whisper. She hated the way her mother made her feel small, even though she was growing into a young woman with thoughts far larger than the walls around her. But there was no point in arguing. Words were like water on stone. They would erode nothing, no matter how long she tried. After breakfast, Alara retreated to her room. Her workbench called to her like an old friend. There, she began to tinker quietly. Today, she was trying to create a small device that could detect air currents outside the settlement, a tool that could help predict storms in the mountainous region. Her fingers moved with practiced skill, twisting wires, tightening screws, and carefully arranging tiny components. She loved these moments. Here, in the solitude of her room, she was not the timid girl under her mother's thumb. She was an inventor, a thinker, someone who could shape the world, even in small ways. She imagined the mountains outside responding to her device, whispering secrets that only she could understand. Time passed unnoticed until the door creaked open. Alara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "Still playing with that nonsense," her mother said, stepping inside without knocking. She looked down at the partially assembled device with disdain. "You'll never make anything useful. You waste your time while others contribute to the colony." Alara's hands stilled. I'm trying to help, mother," she said quietly. Her mother shook her head. "Trying is not enough. The colony needs results, not childish dreams. Remember that, Alara. Dreams do not feed people. Action does. Focus on what matters or you will achieve nothing." Alara lowered her eyes, fighting the frustration rising inside her. She knew her mother had never understood her. The woman had no time for the small wonders that fascinated Alara, the clever mechanisms or the subtle rhythms of the mountains. To her mother, only productivity mattered. Once her mother left, Ilara let out a quiet sigh. She looked at the device on the workbench, feeling a mixture of pride and doubt. Was it foolish to try? Perhaps it was, but the thought of stopping felt worse than enduring her mother's criticism. The world outside, vast, strange, and full of possibilities, called to her in a way her mother never could. After a few hours of careful work, Ilara finally finished the device. She held it in her hands, turning it over to admire the delicate wiring and the tiny sensors. It was crude, certainly, but it worked. She had tested it in her small room, and it had successfully detected changes in air pressure, a small victory that made her heart race. Maybe one day, she whispered to herself, I'll make something that even Mother can't ignore. Even as she spoke, a faint rumble echoed from the mountains. Ilara paused, listening. The sound was deep and steady, almost like a heartbeat within the earth itself. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. The mountains had always fascinated her. They were wild, untamed, and mysterious, everything her mother despised in her imagination. Ilara decided that tonight she would go further than ever before. She would climb to the edge of the settlement, to the place where the mountains began, and see if her device could pick up the faintest currents of air, the whisper of distant storms. It was dangerous, but her heart leapt at the thought. Danger was a word her mother used to control her. To Ilara, it was a challenge, a puzzle waiting to be solved. The day passed slowly, each hour filled with her mother's reminders and instructions. Ilara obeyed silently, all the while planning her evening adventure. As the twin suns dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, she finally seized her chance. She slipped away from the settlement, her device tucked safely in her backpack. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged silhouettes against the glowing sky. Ilara's breath quickened as she climbed over rocks and through thin snow. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap, the small device inside humming faintly as it adjusted to the mountain air. The wind carried a strange, electric scent, and she felt alive in a way she never had under her mother's roof. After hours of careful climbing, she reached a high ridge that overlooked a valley below. She set her device on the ground and activated it. A series of tiny lights blinked, signaling the detection of wind currents she could barely feel. She smiled, a soft, triumphant smile that belonged only to her. Here in this wild place she was free. Then she noticed something unusual. Across the valley, moving silently among the rocks, was a figure she had never seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the ease of someone who belonged to the mountains. His movements were deliberate, precise, and utterly silent. He stopped, raised a hand slightly, and seemed to study her for a long moment before disappearing behind a ridge. Ilara's heart pounded. Who was he? He seemed like a creature of the mountains themselves, something human yet more attuned to the land than any settler could be. She felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. He had not spoken, but his presence felt like a question, an invitation to discover something beyond the world she knew. As night fell, she packed her device and began the careful descent back to the settlement. The stars above the mountains were brighter than she had ever seen, their lights spilling across the snow in silver streaks. She could not stop thinking about the silent figure. Who was he, and why had he appeared in the mountains, seemingly out of nowhere? When she finally slipped back into her room, she found her mother asleep, the harsh lines of her face softened in slumber. Ilara sat by her workbench, her mind racing. She knew that tomorrow, her mother would continue to control and criticize her, but now something had changed. The mountains had whispered a secret to her, and the figure she had glimpsed promised a future filled with possibilities she could only begin to imagine. Ilara drifted to sleep that night with a spark of hope burning within her. For the first time in her life, she felt that her curiosity, her inventions, and her dreams were not entirely bound by the shadow of her mother. Somewhere in the mountains, a presence waited, a silent mentor perhaps, or a guardian of the wild. And Alara knew, deep in her heart, that this encounter would change her life forever. The sun had barely risen when Alara woke, her mind still filled with the image of the silent figure in the mountains. She rubbed her eyes and reached for her workbench, but the faint hum of the life support system felt different today, more pressing, more alive. She could not stop thinking about the mountains, about the figure, about the possibility that her world was bigger than the small settlement she had known all her life. Her mother's voice rang sharp from the kitchen, as it always did. "Ilara, come. Breakfast and then chores." "Yes, mother," Ilara replied, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She moved mechanically, obeying her mother's instructions, but her heart raced with excitement. She had made a promise to herself last night. She would climb higher, explore further, and perhaps discover who or what was watching her from the mountains. The morning passed slowly. Ilara's chores felt heavier than usual. She scrubbed the floors, organized supplies, and checked the small solar panels that powered part of the settlement. But even as she worked, her mind wandered to the valley ridge where she had glimpsed the figure. She imagined the way he had moved, quiet, deliberate, almost like he belonged to the mountains themselves. It was just before noon when something unusual happened. A small commotion began at the edge of the settlement. Villagers gathered, whispering to each other, pointing toward the northern ridge. Ilara's curiosity flared, and she rushed toward the crowd, her heart thumping. There, standing at the edge of the ridge, was the figure, taller and broader than any ordinary man, his posture straight and steady, his eyes scanning the settlement. It was the silent mountain man she had seen the night before. But now, up close, she could see the details of his face: sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and a calm expression that seemed almost untouchable by worry or fear. The villagers murmured in fear and awe. No one had seen him before, and the mountains were thought to be empty of people. "Who is he?" someone whispered. "A wanderer." Ilara's pulse quickened. She felt an inexplicable pull toward him, a sense that he held knowledge she needed. Without thinking, she started toward the figure, ignoring the whispers and warnings. He did not move or speak. Instead, he raised a hand slightly, as if acknowledging her approach. When she reached the edge of the ridge, he tilted his head and pointed to a nearby path that led deeper into the mountains. Then he stepped aside and waited. Ilara hesitated for only a moment before following. The path wound steeply upward, flanked by rocks and thin snow. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and cold stone. As they walked, Ilara tried to speak. "Who are you? How do you know the mountains so well?" The figure remained silent. He did not answer, but he stopped to gesture toward a distant rock formation, pointing at the wind swirling around its peaks. Then he knelt and traced patterns in the snow with a stick, patterns that seemed to explain how to read the currents of the wind. Ilara watched carefully, her mind absorbing every movement. She realized that he was teaching her, not with words but with gestures, actions, and simple demonstrations. It was as if he could communicate through understanding, not language. Her excitement grew. For the first time, someone respected her curiosity and intelligence. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The mountain man guided her through hidden trails, teaching her how to notice subtle changes in the environment. How the wind shifted before a storm, how the snow's texture could reveal a safe path, how plants indicated water sources. He never spoke, yet Ilara felt an unspoken trust between them, a bond forming through shared knowledge. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley blanketed in snow. The mountain man stopped and pointed to the horizon, where the twin suns dipped behind the jagged peaks. Then he took a small, folded device from his bag, a strange combination of metal and glass, and handed it to Ilara. Ilara examined it carefully. It was unlike anything she had seen. Tiny gears rotated silently, and small crystals glowed faintly. She turned it over, feeling its weight and balance. Without instruction, she began to experiment, moving parts and observing how it reacted. Slowly, the device activated, projecting a faint map of the valley below, showing wind currents and snow patterns. Alara's eyes widened. This is incredible, she whispered. The mountain man nodded almost imperceptibly and stepped back. He had given her the tool but allowed her to discover its functions herself. It was a lesson in observation, patience, and creativity, a style of teaching she had never experienced before. As the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, Alara realized she had spent the entire day learning from him. Her muscles ached from climbing, her fingers were raw from handling the device, but her mind was alight with understanding. The silent mountain man had shown her a world she had only dreamed of, a world where humans and nature could work together, where observation and intelligence were more powerful than brute force. When it was time to return, the mountain man pointed to a narrow path leading down the mountainside. Alara followed, careful to remember the lessons he had taught. She looked back once, hoping for some sign of communication, but he had already vanished among the rocks, as if he were part of the mountain itself. That night, back in her room, Alara could barely sleep. She placed the device on her workbench and studied it by the faint glow of her desk lamp. Her mind replayed every gesture, every pattern, every subtle hint the mountain man had shared. She realized that she had been given more than a tool. She had been given a way to think, a way to see the world differently. The following days passed in a blur of secret learning. While performing her daily chores and obeying her mother's strict rules, Alara spent every free moment practicing the skills the mountain man had taught. She experimented with small devices, measuring wind currents and snow patterns, charting them on paper, and trying to predict changes in the valley. Each success filled her with confidence, a quiet pride that no one at the settlement could take away. Her mother noticed the change in her demeanor and frowned. "Alara, you seem distracted," she said one evening. "Focus on your chores and responsibilities. The settlement depends on us, not your fantasies." "Yes, mother," Alara replied, her voice calm. But inside, she knew that her mind had already begun to expand beyond the walls of the settlement. She was no longer just a girl under her mother's control. She was a student of the mountains, learning from someone who understood her curiosity and intellect. One afternoon, she decided to test one of the lessons in a real-world experiment. She carried a small device into the valley, following the patterns the mountain man had shown her. The device detected subtle wind currents, and she adjusted it carefully. To her delight, it worked perfectly. The wind map projected by the device matched the movements of the snow and air around her. Alara laughed quietly, a sound she rarely allowed herself. She felt alive in a way she never had before. The mountains, the silent mentor, and her own creativity had awakened something deep inside her, a spark of confidence, intelligence, and freedom that she had longed for all her life. Word of the mountain man began to spread through the settlement. Some villagers were fearful, believing him to be a spirit or a guardian of the mountains. Others were curious but cautious. Alara, however, was determined. She wanted to learn more. She wanted to understand his knowledge, his connection with the mountains, and the secrets he seemed to hold. Days turned into weeks. Each day, she ventured a little further, each experiment a little bolder. She documented everything carefully, recording observations, sketches, and patterns. Her inventions became more sophisticated, blending the lessons from the mountain man with her own creativity. Through it all, her mother remained a presence in the background, critical and demanding, yet unable to suppress the transformation growing within Alara. The girl who had once been timid and obedient was now confident, inventive, and quietly daring. One evening, as Alara returned from a successful experiment in the valley, she found a small, carefully folded note on her workbench. It was written in simple symbols she had never seen before. Her pulse quickened as she realized it had come from the mountain man. She unfolded it carefully. The note contained only a single message: observe, learn, understand. The mountains have more to teach. Alara smiled, her heart swelling with excitement. She had found a mentor, a guide, and a challenge. The silent mountain man had opened a door to a world beyond her mother's control, beyond the settlement's limits. And she knew, without doubt, that her life would never be the same again. That night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The stars outside were brighter than ever, their light sparkling over the snow-covered peaks. Alara's mind raced with possibilities. She imagined devices that could harness the energy of the wind, predict storms, or even help the settlement survive in harmony with the mountains. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the silent mountain man would continue to guide her, not with words but with wisdom, patience, and the power of understanding. For the first time, Alara felt a spark of true freedom. She was no longer just a girl under her mother's shadow. She was a thinker, a learner, and a creator. And the mountains, with their silent guardian, were waiting to teach her everything she could imagine. The morning sun spilled its warm light across the settlement, but Alara barely noticed. Her mind was already in the mountains, replaying the gestures and lessons Kale, the silent mountain man, had shared with her. Each movement he had shown, each subtle signal of the wind and snow, had become a puzzle she was eager to solve. Today, she decided, she would take his teachings further. While performing her morning chores, she carried a small notebook and a handful of tools. Her mother's sharp eyes tracked her every move, ready to reprimand, but Alara moved with a quiet determination she had never felt before. She knew the risk. Any sign of disobedience could earn another lecture or punishment. But the spark Kale had ignited in her could not be ignored. After breakfast, she slipped quietly out of the settlement, heading toward the valley where she had first tested the wind detection device. The snow was crisp beneath her boots, the air cold and clear, carrying faint scents of pine and stone. As she walked, she adjusted the small device Kale had given her, fine-tuning it to detect subtle patterns in the wind. She imagined the invisible currents flowing across the valley, shaping storms and carrying whispers from the distant peaks. Alara set the device down and watched as tiny crystals inside began to glow, forming lines and arcs that traced the wind's path. Her eyes widened in awe. She had seen similar patterns when Kale demonstrated the device, but this time she understood more. The currents shifted predictably, almost like a language she was only beginning to read. She carefully noted the data in her notebook, marking areas where the wind was stronger or weaker, and even tracing small vortices that spun around rocks. Hours passed like minutes. She experimented, adjusted, and retested, and with each success, her confidence grew. Alara realized something important. She was beginning to think like Kale, not just following instructions, but observing, analyzing, and drawing conclusions on her own. A thrill of pride coursed through her chest. She was learning to understand the mountains, not as obstacles but as teachers. That afternoon, Alara ventured to a rocky outcrop she had not explored before. The wind whipped against her face, carrying snowflakes that danced like tiny crystals. She placed the device carefully on a ledge and adjusted the sensors. This time, she experimented with combining the wind patterns with small mechanical vanes she had designed. They moved in response to the currents, converting the invisible energy into motion. A soft laugh escaped her lips. "It works," she whispered, watching as her vanes spun in perfect harmony with the wind. Her invention, inspired by Kale's teachings, was no longer just a tool for observation. It had become a machine that interacted with the mountains, translating nature's invisible forces into visible movement. Alara spent the rest of the day testing her device in various locations. She climbed ridges, crouched behind rocks, and followed the invisible paths of air currents. The device responded perfectly, and her notebook filled with detailed observations. Each success reinforced her belief that humans could work with nature, not against it. The mountains, once a place of mystery and fear, now felt like a partner, a collaborator in her experiments. When she returned to the settlement, the twin suns were low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Ilara's cheeks were flushed with cold and excitement. She entered her room quietly, careful not to disturb her mother, and began to organize her findings. She sketched diagrams, labeled patterns, and noted where her mechanical veins performed best. Her mother appeared at the doorway, frowning. "Ilara, why do you spend so much time wandering? Your work here in the settlement is enough. You are needed, not chasing fantasies in the mountains." Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the strength that Kale had instilled in her. "Mother, I am learning things that could help the settlement. The winds, the snow, I can understand them, and I can use that knowledge to improve our tools. It will make life easier for everyone." Her mother's expression hardened. Life is about work, discipline, and following the rules, not games with wind and snow. Ilara did not argue further. She knew her mother's mind would not change quickly, and she had more important lessons to focus on. With a quiet determination, she returned to her workbench, assembling her device for the next experiment. Over the following days, Ilara's experiments grew more complex. She began integrating small energy collectors into the mechanical vanes, aiming to capture the wind's movement and store it in miniature batteries. She tested different materials, learning how each reacted to cold, wind, and snow. Every failure was a lesson, every success a triumph. One evening, after a particularly successful experiment, she climbed a ridge to watch the sunset over the mountains. The valley below shimmered with frost and snow, the wind moving in invisible rivers across the landscape. She activated her device, and the vanes turned gracefully, channeling the wind into the small battery. For a moment, she felt as if she had captured a piece of the mountain itself. Her thoughts drifted to Kale. She wished she could share her progress with him, show him the improvements she had made. Yet she also understood the lesson he had taught her. Understanding comes from observation, not from explanation. If she truly wanted to learn, she had to rely on her own ingenuity. The next morning, Ilara noticed something unusual at the edge of the settlement. A small group of villagers had gathered, whispering excitedly. She approached cautiously and overheard them talking about the recent energy shortage in the settlement. The power collectors were not keeping up with demand, and some of the communal systems were failing intermittently. Ilara's heart raced. She realized that her device, combined with the lessons from Kale, could provide a solution. The energy from the wind could supplement the settlement's power supply, helping them survive the harsh conditions of the mountains. But she also knew that proposing her invention to the settlement would be risky. Her mother would disapprove, and the villagers might not understand its purpose. That afternoon, Ilara returned to her workbench and began constructing a larger version of her device. She integrated multiple vanes, expanded the energy collectors, and reinforced the structure to withstand stronger winds. She worked tirelessly, her fingers raw, her mind focused entirely on the challenge. As she labored, she felt a sense of transformation within herself. She was no longer the timid girl who hid behind her mother's rules. She was a creator, a thinker, a problem solver. Each step of her invention reflected her growing confidence and understanding. Kale's silent teachings had unlocked something within her, a spark of human ingenuity that refused to be suppressed. By evening, the larger device was ready. Ilara carried it carefully to the edge of the valley, positioning it where the wind currents were strongest. She activated it, holding her breath as the vanes began to turn. Slowly, the energy flowed into the small battery she had attached. A soft glow indicated that the device was working, converting the mountain's invisible forces into usable energy. Ilara's heart swelled with pride. She had taken Kale's lessons and transformed them into something tangible, something that could benefit others. For the first time, She felt that her creativity, intelligence, and determination had a purpose beyond herself. That night she returned to her room, exhausted but exhilarated. She recorded every detail of her experiment in her notebook, sketching diagrams and writing observations. She knew that tomorrow she would continue to refine the device, making it more efficient, more reliable, more in harmony with the mountains. As she drifted to sleep, her mind replayed the day's achievements. She realized that she was no longer just learning from Kale. She was beginning to think like him, to anticipate the patterns of the mountains, to create solutions from observation and intelligence. She understood now that human ingenuity was not limited by rules, fear, or the expectations of others. It was a force that could shape the world, even in the most challenging environments. Alara's transformation was not just about invention. It was about confidence, independence, and trust in her own abilities. She had learned to see beyond the walls of her settlement, to understand the language of the wind and snow, and to create tools that could harmonize with nature rather than fight it. The mountains, once mysterious and intimidating, had become her mentors. And Kale, the silent mountain man, had shown her that the greatest lessons were not taught through words, but through observation, patience, and the courage to explore. For the first time, Alara felt truly alive. She was no longer a girl living under her mother's shadow. She was a thinker, a creator, and a student of the mountains, and she knew that her journey was just beginning. The lessons she had learned, the inventions she had created, and the understanding she had gained would guide her toward a future filled with possibility, discovery, and the quiet power of human ingenuity. The night outside her window was calm, the stars shining like distant beacons over the snow-covered peaks. Alara lay awake, her mind alive with ideas for new devices, new experiments, and new ways to harness the secrets of the mountains. She knew that Kale would return in his own time, guiding her silently once more. And she was ready. She was ready to learn, to create, and to transform not only herself, but the settlement she called home. The sun had barely crested the peaks when Alara woke, her mind alive with anticipation. Today was different. Today, she would show the settlement what she had been working on for weeks, the device that could harness the mountain winds to generate energy. Her fingers itched to test it one last time before presenting it. She carefully adjusted the vanes, checked the battery connections, and examined the small crystals that glowed faintly when the wind was strong. Her mother appeared in the doorway as she worked. "Alara, I told you to focus on practical tasks, not wasting your time on toys," she said sharply. Alara straightened, meeting her mother's gaze with quiet determination. "Mother, this is not a toy. It is a machine that can help the settlement. I've tested it and it works." Her mother's frown deepened. "The settlement needs real work, not childish experiments. If you insist on showing this, be careful. Don't embarrass yourself." Alara said nothing. Words had little power over what she knew she could do. She gathered the device, carrying it carefully to the open valley below the settlement. Villagers had already begun to notice her presence, curious about what she was doing. Whispers spread quickly. "What is she doing? Is it another one of her fantasies?" Alara set the device on a small rise where the wind was strongest. She connected the battery and adjusted the vanes. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the vanes began to turn, catching the invisible currents of air. The crystals glowed softly, and a gentle hum filled the valley as energy began to flow into the battery. Gasps of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Villagers stepped closer, peering at the device. Some smiled, others furrowed their brows in disbelief. Alara could feel their curiosity and skepticism, and she focused on the demonstration. She adjusted the vanes, showing how the energy output increased when the wind shifted. The device responded perfectly, translating natural forces into usable power. Her mother stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed. Her expression was hard to read. Pride, doubt, irritation, all mingled on her face. Alara ignored her mother's gaze and concentrated on the device. This moment was bigger than any reprimand or criticism. This was proof of what human ingenuity, observation, and patience could achieve. A small child ran forward, eyes wide with excitement. "It's moving," the child exclaimed. "It's magic," Alara laughed softly. "It's not magic," she said. "It's understanding. I watched how the wind moves, and I built something that works with it, not against it." The villagers murmured among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered words of encouragement. Alara adjusted the device again, showing how it could store energy in the battery for use later. She explained, as simply as she could, how understanding the mountains' currents could improve life for everyone. Her mother finally spoke, her voice sharp but tinged with curiosity. "How does it work? Explain it." Alara hesitated. She wanted to explain fully, but words alone could not capture the depth of understanding she had gained from Kale. Instead, she pointed to the device. "See for yourself. Watch the veins move. Feel the energy being stored. You don't need to understand every detail to see that it works." Her mother stepped closer, studying the device carefully. The stern expression on her face softened slightly as she observed the glowing crystals and the spinning veins. The hum of energy filled the valley, a sound of quiet triumph. Alara realized that her mother, for all her strictness, had a mind that could appreciate ingenuity when it was undeniable. Encouraged by her mother's attention, Alara demonstrated the device further. She connected multiple units, showing how they could work together to provide power for the settlement. She explained how each device could adjust automatically to the wind, ensuring consistent energy production. The villagers watched, fascinated, as the machines came to life, turning invisible natural forces into practical solutions. By late afternoon, the demonstration was complete. The settlement's leaders gathered to discuss what they had witnessed. Some were skeptical, worried about the practicality of using the devices on a larger scale. Others were impressed, realizing that Alara's invention could significantly improve the settlement's energy supply. Alara waited quietly as the discussion unfolded. She did not argue or insist. She had shown them proof, and now it was up to them to decide. But deep inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, she had taken her ideas from imagination to reality, and the results were undeniable. After the meeting, a few villagers approached her privately. "This is incredible," one said. "We never thought someone could understand the mountains like you do." Alara smiled. "I learned from someone who knows the mountains better than anyone. I just had to pay attention." Her mother remained silent, watching from a distance. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than Alara had ever heard. "You've done something remarkable. I may not understand it completely, but I see that you are capable. Perhaps I underestimated you." Alara felt a warmth in her chest. Her mother's words, though limited, carried recognition and respect, things she had longed for but rarely received. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile bridge they were beginning to build. Over the next few days, Alara worked tirelessly to improve the devices, refining their design and ensuring they could withstand the mountain winds. She tested different materials, adjusted vein sizes, and experimented with energy storage methods. Each improvement made the devices more efficient, more reliable, and more in harmony with the natural forces she had learned to read. Word of her invention spread through the settlement, inspiring others to think differently. Children began to follow her, curious about the mountains and the wind. Adults began to experiment with small devices of their own, learning to observe nature and work with it. Alara realized that her innovation was not just about energy. It was about teaching others to see the world differently, to appreciate human ingenuity and the power of careful observation. One evening, as she watched the sunset from the ridge, Alara felt a familiar presence beside her. She turned to see Kale, the silent mountain man standing quietly, his expression calm and approving. He had returned just as he always did to witness her growth. Alara smiled. "I did it," she whispered. "I applied what you taught me and it worked. The settlement, they see it now." Kale nodded slightly as if confirming her words. He pointed toward the mountains, then to her devices, and finally back at her. The message was clear. She had learned, she had grown, and she had become capable of transforming knowledge into action. For the first time, Alara felt fully confident in herself. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and her mother's criticism, and she had triumphed without confrontation or conflict. Her ingenuity, patience, and understanding had spoken for themselves. That night she lay in bed, her mind alive with possibilities. She imagined expanding the devices, improving energy efficiency, and teaching others to observe and learn from the mountains. She knew the journey was far from over, but she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Alara realized that her true transformation was not just about her invention, it was about her belief in herself. She had endured years of doubt and strict control, yet she had not let it define her. She had discovered her own strength, intelligence, and creativity. And with Kale's guidance, she had learned that human ingenuity could shape the world, even in the most challenging environments. The settlement, once a place of limitation and rigid rules, had begun to change because of her work. The villagers had seen that understanding, observation, and creativity could achieve results that sheer effort alone could not. Alara felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her curiosity and persistence had made a tangible difference. As she drifted to sleep, the stars sparkled above the mountains, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the limitless potential within herself. She had proven that intelligence, patience, and creativity could overcome doubt and skepticism, and that the quiet power of human ingenuity could inspire others. Alara's journey was far from over, but she was no longer the timid girl under her mother's shadow. She was a thinker, a creator, and a problem solver. She had faced her first real test and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. And she knew that the lessons of the mountains and the silent guidance of Kale would continue to shape her path toward a future filled with discovery, innovation, and possibility. The first light of dawn touched the peaks of the mountains, spilling golden across the valley. Below, Alara stood on the ridge, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. The devices she had built glimmered faintly as the wind stirred their veins, storing energy for the settlement below. For the first time, she allowed herself a deep, quiet smile. She had come far, from the timid girl living under her mother's strict rules to a young inventor who could change the life of her entire community. Alara descended carefully to the settlement. Villagers were already stirring, carrying out morning chores, but their eyes lingered on the devices she had set in the valley. There was an air of anticipation, a quiet excitement. People had begun to understand that something extraordinary was happening, that someone among them was quietly shaping the future. Her mother emerged from the small house at the center of the settlement, watching her daughter with a mixture of curiosity and pride. "You've been busy," she said, her voice softer than usual. Alara nodded. "I have, and I want to show everyone how these devices can help the settlement survive and thrive. The mountains have a lot to teach us, and we can use that knowledge to work with nature, not against it." Her mother studied her, the lines on her face softening. She said nothing more, but Alara sensed a shift. Recognition, at long last, and perhaps even admiration. The villagers gathered around as Alara activated the devices one by one. The vanes turned gracefully, catching the wind and channeling energy into the batteries. Small lights flickered on in the settlement, powered by the clean energy her machines provided. Children clapped, and adults murmured in surprise and delight. The settlement, which had always relied on the limited output of communal energy systems, now had a new source of power, something that worked in harmony with the mountains rather than against them. Alara explained, in simple words, how each device worked, showing the villagers how to adjust them and interpret the energy readings. She encouraged them to observe the wind and snow, to understand patterns, and to adapt their machines accordingly. She realized that teaching was as important as inventing. By sharing her knowledge, she empowered others to think, create, and solve problems. A few villagers hesitated at first, unsure if the devices would really work. But as the hours passed, and they saw the energy lights remain steady even through shifting winds, their doubts faded. Soon, several of them were experimenting on their own, placing smaller devices in strategic locations, noting patterns, and learning to work with the natural forces around them. Alara's mother watched quietly, the usual sternness replaced with thoughtful observation. At last she spoke. "You have done something remarkable, Alara. You have not only created a machine that works but shown that understanding and intelligence can guide our actions. I see now that your curiosity is not a weakness. It is a strength." Alara felt a surge of gratitude and relief. Her mother's words, though simple, carried the acknowledgement she had longed for. She stepped closer and said gently, "Thank you, Mother. I just wanted to make life better for everyone." Her mother nodded. There was no need for further words. The bond between them, strained for years, had begun to heal. It was the quiet result of Alara's persistence, patience, and brilliance. As the day wore on, Alara returned to the valley to check the devices. She carefully noted energy levels, adjusted veins for optimal performance, and recorded her findings in a new notebook. The mountains seemed alive around her, as if acknowledging her work. The wind flowed through the valley with a familiar rhythm, and Alara felt a deep connection to the natural world, a harmony she had never known before. In the late afternoon, she noticed movement on the ridge above the valley. It was Kale, the silent mountain man, returning to observe. Alara smiled and waved. He approached slowly, his calm presence a reassurance that she was on the right path. He did not speak, but his gestures encouraged her to continue, to refine her inventions, and to trust in her abilities. Alara showed Kale her improvements, the new configurations of veins and energy collectors, and the data she had recorded over the past weeks. He watched silently, nodding at her successes, his approval quiet but unmistakable. She realized that his mentorship had given her not only knowledge but the confidence to act, to experiment, and to create solutions that mattered. That evening, the settlement gathered to celebrate the success of the devices. Children danced, elders smiled, and even those who had been skeptical began to see the potential of working with the mountains rather than against them. Alara spoke to the crowd, sharing her excitement and encouraging others to observe, experiment, and innovate. She saw sparks of curiosity in their eyes, the same spark Kale had ignited in her. Her mother stood nearby, watching quietly. She did not speak, but her expression conveyed pride and acceptance. Alara felt a deep warmth. She understood now that her journey had not just been about inventing devices. It had been about transformation, transforming herself, her mother's perception, and even the settlement's way of thinking. Night fell and the stars appeared over the mountains, twinkling like distant lanterns. Alara climbed a small ridge, her mind alive with new ideas. She imagined expanding the devices, creating new machines that worked with water currents, sunlight, and other natural forces. She thought about teaching the villagers, inspiring a culture of observation, innovation, and cooperation with the environment. Kale appeared beside her, silent as ever, and pointed toward the stars. Alara understood his meaning. The journey of learning and creating was limitless. The mountains, the wind, and the natural world held infinite lessons for those willing to observe and understand. Alara felt a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer the timid girl living in shadows. She was a thinker, an inventor, and a guide. She understood that human ingenuity, patience, and observation could shape not only her own life but the lives of those around her. She had endured her mother's strictness, faced doubt and skepticism, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. The next morning, the settlement was alive with energy. Devices hummed softly in the valley, powering lights, heating systems, and communal tools. Villagers moved with purpose, experimenting and learning. Alara walked among them, observing, guiding, and sharing knowledge. She realized that her inventions were more than machines. They were tools of empowerment, teaching everyone to value curiosity, intelligence, and cooperation. Her mother joined her, carrying a small basket of supplies. She handed Alara a tool she had been working on quietly, an acknowledgement of trust and respect. "I want to help," she said simply. "I may not understand everything, but I want to contribute." Alara took the tool and smiled. For the first time, she felt that her mother was truly an ally, not an obstacle. The years of tension and control had given way to a new understanding, built on respect, recognition, and shared purpose. As the sun set over the mountains, Alara stood on the ridge once more, looking at the settlement below. The lights glowed steadily, powered by her devices and the wind that had once seemed untouchable. She felt a deep connection to the mountains, the wind, and the people around her. She understood now that her journey was not just about invention. It was about transformation, growth, and the quiet power of human intelligence. Kale appeared again, his presence a reminder of all she had learned. Alara nodded to him, silently expressing gratitude. She knew he would continue to guide her in subtle ways as she expanded her work and inspired others. That night as she lay in bed, Alara reflected on how far she had come. She had endured her mother's strictness, embraced her curiosity, learned from the mountains, and transformed her settlement. She understood that the future was full of possibilities, limited only by imagination, observation, and courage. Alara closed her eyes, smiling softly. The mountains whispered their approval in the wind, the devices hummed with stored energy, and the stars shone like beacons of endless potential. She was ready for whatever came next, confident in her ability to observe, create, and inspire. The settlement had changed, her mother had changed, and most importantly, Alara had changed. She was no longer the girl who had hidden in shadows. She was a human capable of understanding, inventing, and shaping her world. And as the mountains stood silent and eternal around her, Alara knew that she had found her true place, a horizon filled with possibility, guided by intelligence, curiosity, and the quiet power of human ingenuity.